action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, business and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp and I'm Giles Edwards. Today I've caught David Moore, a creative director and copywriter living in the land of beef and corn. David has served in ad land for over 30 years. In that time, he's written ads for dog wormers, mainframe computer channel extenders, and $1,000 steaks. He even named the tallest, fastest roller coaster in the world. Lauded on LinkedIn for sharing ads for ad agencies, David is dead set on reminding us all that we have an obligation to advertise ourselves, yet remarkably few do. On being a creative director, David says, the hardest part is learning that just because it's not the way you'd do it, doesn't make it wrong. I've never felt so seen. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Right, 7 quick fires, David. Cats or dogs?
Oh, cats.
Easy. Beef or corn?
Oh, beef.
I was warned not to, but steel or titanium?
Ooh, titanium.
Jackson Brown or the Cleveland Browns?
Tough one. I think I'm going to have to go with the Cleveland Browns.
Nice. Right, creative briefs. Fill out or write?
Oh, write them. Absolutely. It's the biggest problem is people fill them out when they need to be writing them.
Nice, well said. Okay, best ad now. We've got Y&R's Backbone or Computers Can't Cry?
I'm going to go with Computers Can't Cry because it seems so timely today.
Yes, yeah. And then finally, there's always an unfair one. This is a Call to Action pod alumni question. Carolyn Barclay or Derek Walker?
Ooh, hands down, Carolyn Barclay. Sorry, Derek.
Derek. We just lost a listener.
He'll be back.
Amazing. David, thank you so much for joining us.
As I said, it's wonderful to be here and love the opportunity to learn from you and just talk about the things that matter. And even things that don't matter.
Yes, yeah, especially where we're good at that. We're good at that. So, as you know, we like to celebrate the wonderfully weird and weirdly wonderful ways that guests end up where they are now. So if we rewind back to the start, what was your first ever job? And then what was your first job in Adland?
My first ever job is I was a photographer for a national auto racing publication. When I was 14, I was having my pictures published on the front cover, which is what made me think I was going to be a photographer. My first job in advertising was selling advertising space for a local newspaper. It was the worst job I ever had in my life. I ground my teeth in my sleep.
Right, okay, I've got questions. Photographer at 14, how does that happen?
Yeah. My father gave me a camera had a camera and said, if you can learn to use this, you can have it. And we had a darkroom at home, and I took to it like a duck to water and absolutely loved it.
Oh, wow.
But then I worked in a photo studio and a custom processing lab and quickly realized I don't have patience to sit there and, agonize over things. I would go somewhere and say, there's a photograph here, shoot off a bunch of film and go find it in the darkroom. It's probably not that different than how we come up with ideas today.
Yeah, that's interesting though, because at that age, and perhaps not as young as 14, although I might be wrong, were you interested in creativity and kind of image making or capturing creative moments or anything like that? Or was that literally just as random a chance as your father had a camera and instructed you to learn it?
I think it's entirely random. I had no idea about the creative process. I just know that I loved going into the darkroom and finding the image that was there, not finding it in the scene, but going and finding it.
Okay. And then, so what happened between that, your age of 14, and then working at the local newspaper?
Well, I went to university because my father had a PhD and had taught at the university, and neither of my older two brothers went to school. So expectation was, of course, you're going to school.
Yeah.
And since I was going to be a photographer, I went into journalism because that's where photography was. And that's when I quickly learned that I didn't really want to do that, but I stumbled into Introduction to Advertising. And it had psychology, art, literature, history, pop culture, photography, writing, design, everything that seemed to excite me. And it's like, wow, I love this. And I had a very influential advertising professor who really helped point me in the right direction.
Oh, brilliant. That's actually remarkably similar to a very recent episode with the brilliant Greg Hahn, who similarly took a journalist route in his education.
Well, I think there's something to that, is that we're looking for truth. And when you're making a great ad, you're not trying to we're not writing fiction. We're writing the truth. We're just trying to find a compelling way to say it.
Yeah. Bang on. So what was it about journalism then that didn't tick some of these boxes that obviously needed to be ticked?
Well, I never went into journalism because I thought I wanted to be a news writer. It's just where photography happened to sit. But that's when I discovered advertising. And when it came to photography, as I said, I had no patience to sit around and figure out how to light something. And I also saw that in order to really get ahead, you needed to know people, and I didn't know anybody.
Right. So how did you get your first advertising gig?
My university professor, Albert C. Book, sent me on 2 interviews. One was with the newspaper, the Omaha World Herald, and the other was with a local TV station. Just sent me there cold. I happened to get the job with the newspaper, and then after 7 months of selling ad space to adult movie theaters and bookstores and all that, the TV station called me and gave me a job writing TV commercials with no experience.
Oh, wow. So so that must have been quite tricky to start with. Was there a team there you could learn from at least? Or did you just learn by doing?
Yeah, I just learned by doing. I just got in there. It was all low budget work. You just got handed a client and you'd go and you'd write a commercial and go shoot it. I figured it out that in 3 years I made 500 TV commercials.
500?
It was really great proving ground because you don't have time to agonize over everything. You just have to get in, find it, make it, move on to the next one.
Oh, wow. And were there any particular... I'm just fascinated by how the problem or how the brief or how the opportunity would have presented itself to you, especially at that type of speed. So 500 TV commercials in 3 years. Presumably there wasn't even much chance to read a brief.
Oh, there were no briefs.
Right.
You got introduced to the client and you met them, found out what they were trying to sell, and you went and you wrote a commercial. One time I went with the account person to some small town where they were going to do they call a road show. They were going to do a half-hour TV show on this town, which is really an excuse to sell ads. And I went door to door with the sales guy, and he would try to do a sales pitch. If he found somebody who wanted to buy an ad, I had to sit down right there and write it, and using a 35 millimeter camera, shoot slides, take the pictures, then move on to the next door. It was a trial by fire.
Wow, fast briefs. That's amazing. Does anything stick out from your memory of those times? Were there any particular ads that you can look back on and think that was a good ad? Or was it so rushed you would just write, you were kind of drowning in features and not really having the time to explore the benefits, etc.?
There was no time to do anything very well. But that was the takeaway from that, was understanding if I had time or if I had clients who understood what they actually had here, then we could do something great.
Yeah.
But no, there was never time.
Wow, it's fascinating to me that was even ever the case. But then I suppose because media is so fragmented nowadays, there is just such a kind of plethora of opportunity to advertise on so many different channels. Whereas I suppose it kind of makes sense retrospectively that it would be more of a conveyor belt of TV commercials.
It was. So the TV station would, in essence, give away the production if you bought a package of airtime. So I was an add-on.
How did that role develop then? How did you become more of the accomplished writer we know today? How did you go from that to then where you are now?
I got incredibly lucky. I got incredibly lucky to get both of those first 2 jobs. And then I got incredibly lucky that I had met these principals at this agency back when I was in university. And I got frustrated with my job. I had a new boss who I did not see eye to eye with. And I got mad and I called up the general manager of the agency, and I asked to buy him lunch. He didn't remember who I was, but went to lunch with me, told him what I was doing and what I was looking for, if he had any advice. And he said to me, well, we just had a copywriter resign yesterday. Why don't you call so-and-so? And in fact, I'll have him call you. And they called me and I did some spec work and they hired me. And then I learned from some very smart people. A lot of it, though, was learning by doing and a lot of reading.
Yeah, well, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And then if we, I mean, there's a few other meatier topics that we want to dig into in a bit more detail. So if we accelerate that part of your career, over the years, your job titles have included copywriter, producer, creative director, president, managing partner, an account planner, and probably a few more that I, not privy to. Firstly, it sounds significant. It also sounds a lot more varied than many will, I suppose, ever get to enjoy. What have you learnt wearing all of those agency hats?
Oh, great question. I think what I learned was to just keep striving. I never had a vision that I wanted to be a creative director or I wanted to be agency president or any of those things. I wanted to do great work. And as a copywriter, I realized that there was somebody over me standing in the way of the work being as good as it could be. So, all right, I need to have that job. Then as creative director, you realize that, well, the account people aren't selling the work right or don't know how it is or the clients don't have the relationship, then I need to be in a role where I have that. I just kept stepping up, not because I wanted that. I just wanted to do great work.
Yeah. So you had to step over that next part where there might have been some friction or something to enable that great work. And then can I ask, if were you ever, when you stepped into and started those roles, were you ever in a position where you felt like you knew how to do that role? Or did you step into the creative director role initially and then the president role and the managing partner role thinking, I need to learn how to do this by doing it?
I think I felt like I knew how to be a creative director. That seemed to come pretty naturally. Being agency president meant that I had to play a slightly different role than I was used to, and I never would crack. It sort of cracked me up. I'd come into a meeting and people would be all, "Ooh, you're meeting with the president," and I'd laugh like, "Do you know who I really am?" You have to, but you have to act that role, and it's amazing what doors that will open if you just have the confidence.
Yes, of course. My question also, just to clarify, wasn't to suggest that you didn't know how to do the roles when you were stepping into them.
Oh, no.
More that I'm always fascinated that people often talk about their roles as being something entirely new that needs to be explored and learnt on the job to a point, because of course you can't, fully understand or experience all the context of a role until you're kind of in it. But I also just like your refreshing take on that progress through those job titles that you were learning by doing and seeing there was someone above you and moving up.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that keeps me moving in life is learning something new. I always want to learn something new, and every role brings that opportunity to me. Even what I'm doing now, it keeps, I continue to learn something every single day, and I love it. Which is what I've always loved about advertising, is that I can go through a day and work on multiple different types of clients in multiple industries doing a variety of different things. So I don't get bored. I absolutely love what I do.
Yeah, that's really good. And I mean, to be honest, that's one of the few things I was confident I knew about you. And I've seen you talk on the Brief Bros, in fact, about that and made that exact point that you love this industry. And then I suppose it's probably both a celebration, but also a comment on the industry and some flaws in the industry. I assume that led you to setting up your wonderful ad agencies advertising themselves focus. Is that right? Is it more of a celebration of ad agencies advertising themselves, or is it in part a criticism that ad agencies don't typically do that anymore?
I think it's both. I think when you look back and you realize and you see all the great work that was regularly done for agencies that believed in themselves enough to put their own name out there on the line. And now it does frustrate me. It's like, why aren't we doing this? I wouldn't go to a doctor who doesn't take care of his own health. I wouldn't eat in a restaurant where the chef wouldn't dare dine. Why should I give you potentially millions of dollars for advertising when you don't believe in it yourself?
Yeah, I meant to clarify actually before we dug into anything, and so that's an error on my part, that we have had a significant amount of listener questions to squeeze in. So I'm going to stick to when we get to that stage. I'm going to stick to I think I'm going to try and stick to just two as we normally would, and I'm going to try and subtly crowbar all of the others in prior to doing that. But our good friend Derek Walker, actually, one of the questions he submitted feels appropriate to bring up now, which is why are agencies so hesitant to advertise themselves? And I must say, we did receive that question in a couple of different shapes and sizes from others too.
Well, it's purely an opinion. It's not done with any in-depth research, although maybe I should do that. But I call it the four horsemen of the adpocalypse. Okay, there's four reasons that we don't. It's fear, because we're afraid of what will our peers think and say if we're not doing just an amazing job. Margins. Agencies really do run on thin margins these days, so there's just not the budget and time they feel to do it. There's arrogance, like, oh, we don't need to. It's kind of beneath us. We're a professional services firm. Or ignorance. A lot of times what I do here is like, well, there's really nowhere to run it. I don't know how we would ever reach our audiences.
That's worrying.
But I think the real reason, though, is they're just lost. They absolutely don't know what to say.
Yeah.
They want to be all things to all people.
Yeah. Well, that is quite alarming. You actually on I've mentioned them already, but on the Brief Bros interview you gave, which was coming up to maybe 18 months, almost 2 years ago, you talked about Y&R and how consistently and routinely they would advertise. Are they kind of the shining light that you look back on as the standard?
Well, they're the ones that opened my eyes to it, because I came across a stash of Fortune magazines from about late 50s to the 70s. And I started going through them, and I noticed that in every single issue was a full-page ad for Y&R. And once I did the research, they ran a full-page advertisement for themselves in every issue of Fortune from about 1930 until about 1970. Some were amazing, some were so-so, but you realize that they showed up every single month. To do that over and over and over and over is amazing. And once you get into it, you start to discover there are some real gems, not just from Y&R, but from other agencies that were doing it. And now it's so rare when you do find an agency who promotes themselves, like Gasp. It's a breath of fresh air. It's like, wow, somebody actually gives a damn about it and is willing to go out there and say, this is what we believe in. I love that.
Just to completely show my hand here, I was actually, I'm over it now a few minutes later, but I was quite upset you didn't choose Backbone in the quick fires, because that's always been my favourite ad of theirs, the Y&R Backbone.
It's an amazing ad. It's a close choice between those two, and I think the computers just feels particularly relevant, and when there's this mad rush to we can just use AI to write our copy. It's like, yeah, no, not so much.
Yeah, I'm going to dig into the your four horsemen of the Adpocalypse slightly, if I may quickly, because funnily enough, Derek actually also asked, what has fear done to the advertising industry? The first of your 4 points was fear, and obviously that was only in response to me asking about why ad agencies don't advertise themselves. But is there a bigger problem at play here that's affecting ad agencies? Because actually, and I'm only realising this while I ask this, is that ignorance obviously is part of that mix too. If an agency isn't sure how to reach the people they need to reach, then actually that's quite alarming and should shock a few of their potential clients.
It is, and they are afraid because they approach it generally as they're going to run an ad. And if that ad isn't perfect, then they're going to take heat from all their competitors, from all their peers. Yeah. But that also brings to, I think, one of the biggest problems is the agencies approach it as an ad. They say, well, we ran an ad once and we didn't get any response from it. If a client told you that, what would you tell them? It needs to be a campaign where you set out and say, this is what we believe in. And we're going to craft an ongoing campaign that says that. But they don't know what they believe in. They believe in whatever's going to get a buck in the door. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be turning the whole industry with that brush.
No. I'm all too ready to do that at any given time. So actually, no, that needs to be said and needs to be clarified. And actually, I'm sure both of us could talk at length about all of the the rights of the industry. It just so happens I've set you up to do quite the opposite on that. It's funny, isn't it? Also, you said about the response that ad agencies might fear that they get from their peers, but again, to me, that suggests a wider issue that the ads really aren't meant to be for their peers anyhow. They're meant to be advertising for potential clients. So maybe there's a disconnect there too.
Absolutely. And I had a discussion with an agency principal that I worked with and was trying to get them to find a position and what they stood for. And they were steadfast. They wanted to be full service, offer every conceivable service. They wanted to do it in every media for every client. And I said to them, what would you say if you asked a client who your audience was and they said everybody? And they looked at me and they're like, wow, you're right. And then said, but I don't want to give anything up. Like, well, okay, there's the problem. Yeah. Again, fear and margins.
And what do you mean then by arrogance as one of the other of the four? Do you mean that the arrogance is perhaps the position that they shouldn't need to, or maybe even don't need to advertise to win new business?
Absolutely. We don't need to advertise. It's a relationship business.
Yeah.
People know us. That's how it comes about. And I call bull on that. And I've been in that place.
Yeah, sure. And especially the week we record this, you can't move on social media from ad folk rejoicing in the fact that Elon Musk has finally realized that even Tesla needs to advertise. Now, we could argue both ways whether they've believed in advertising or not historically. And yes, Elon Musk is a significant PR, machine of many ways. So yes, they already have. But it's funny that in one hand, I'm sure that you're right that lots of agencies have an arrogance, however we want to articulate it, that they don't need to. But then equally, why should we then rejoice that when other companies realize they do need to? It's bizarre. Real hypocrisy there.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're full of that in this business.
I'm not going to just do these one by one, because your point on margins, I think, is certainly valid. But you kind of summarized it that agencies are lost. Instead of maybe detailing why we're lost, how can agencies kind of rediscover whatever has been lost? Like, what's your advice? Because you've held so many different roles. You have significant experience, not solely from your own career, of course. It's supplemented by this kind of peerless research you've done into past ads of ad agencies promoting themselves. So what's your advice to agencies who do feel like they've lost something and need to rediscover it?
Well, they need to have a good hard look at themselves. And while I've heard many times say, we need to treat ourselves like a client. Yes, you do. But sometimes you're too close to it. But you just need to figure out what it is that you stand for, and don't be afraid to run an ad, even if it's an ad campaign about advertising. Because if you can start to own a category, if you're the only one out there talking about it, about the value of advertising, you're going to get credit for that. If you've got good people, you know what? Showcase your people. If you've done great work, showcase your work. Or even just take a stand and say what you believe in.
And how much of that comes from, there's a lovely turn of phrase here, which I've stolen from you, so I'm not trying to claim it. How do you do that from, quote, inside the pickle jar? How can you see that label? Or do you need to hire an ad agency to do your own ads if you're an agency?
I think there's great value to hiring an agency to do your own agency advertising, because you are so close to it. You really don't get an objective point of view, because that's one of the things that we sell to clients all the time is we're going to give you that outsider perspective. We're going to see things that you can't see, but why do we not allow that to happen to ourselves?
Yeah, bang on. And so how would you approach that? Because that's something that you do currently do in where you are now, Kingswood and Palmerston.
That's right. That's how would I approach it? Here's the irony: is that we do our own promotion for ourselves, but I do talk to other people. I know. There's a little hypocrisy there.
No, I'm not going there. I'm not going there.
But you find somebody that you trust and believe in, and bring them in as a consultant. You don't have to actually turn over the keys to somebody. But go ahead and bring them in and say, hey, find another agency. They don't have to be in your market. You could find a PR firm, find one of the many freelance creative directors who are out there in the world, hire them to just give you ideas. It's like, what could we do? Play that game. Play the what if, what could we do? Spend time consulting with them about what is that you believe in. And I think, as I'm going off on my rant now, several years ago, I had a boss who made us do a 5-year vision for our department. And I was so unhappy about that. It's like, this is just busy work and a waste of time. And I ended up having to do it. So I had to write down all these goals. I put it away in a drawer. And several years later, I found it and I realized I'd hit almost every single one of those goals.
Wow.
Not because they were softball goals, but the very act of having to sit down, talk about it, write it down, set that unconscious goal in my mind, and started making decisions based on that. So if you can bring in somebody as a consultant, bring them in to talk with you, it can help clarify your vision and get you out of the immediate day-to-day, oh my gosh, I've got to make rent this month, I've got to make payroll. Start figuring out where it is you want to go, and then you can start to forge a path to get there.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I don't mind plugging a consultant we use called Jess Gregson, and she's helped us do just that. And in fact, I probably went through exactly the same mindset or kind of mental process that you did in response to thinking about, and actually we were aiming further ahead. We were thinking, right, 25 years, then working back to 5 years. Well, then if that needs to happen in 5 years, what needs to happen in 1 year in order to set up year 2, 3, 4, and then kind of you then kind of either zoom in more and more, or you slice it up, which however you can best, I suppose, picture it. And actually, without doing that, and without having someone external to talk to you about that process, speaking on my behalf anyway, it's not something you naturally do because, as you say, you've got rent to pay that month, you've got other overheads, you've got client issues, you've got whatever, and it's tricky.
No, absolutely. One of the things that really changed my view of the agency business is several years ago, we hired a consultant who at the time was not as well known. Now he's a big name, guy named Tim Williams.
Oh, Ignition Consulting.
Exactly. We hired Ignition
Yeah.
quite a while ago, and he really opened my eyes and did great things for our agency, and I consider him incredibly valuable. And I've since introduced this agency I work with now to Blair Enns and their whole business, and that's transforming that business. So bringing somebody in from the outside is really, really valuable.
Yeah, well, I mean, to repeat both names, when I spoke to Blair Enns recently on the Call to Action podcast, I deliberately spoke about Tim Williams because Tim's was one of the first ever pricing courses I did, kind of shaped in a kind of online diploma type sessions that he was running when I think it must have been early-ish days for Ignition Consulting, or at least something he was doing then, and it really opened my eyes to the pricing models that I have since then been trying to firstly understand, but secondly implement in our own business, which led me to Blair as well. So yeah, that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah, I think it's one of the greatest things that we damage ourselves is we don't actually value what it is we do, and we're so eager to win the business that we sell ourselves short.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm going to share a story on that just briefly because I hope it will benefit the agency folk who are listening. But I actually heard from 3 different people who are unknown to each other, all client-side marketers in the last probably 12-ish months. And they've all said the same thing. And the first time I heard it, I thought, well, that's clever, but I don't believe that practice is commonplace. But they've all said it, and it was during a discussion about pricing and how we value creativity and how we communicate and talk about pricing and our fee structure here, specifically about RFPs and pitch process where you are often expected to pitch for free. And they each said something along the lines of clients will ask that, or in a brief that they submit, they might intentionally have a lower than realistic budget because it will help them qualify the agencies that are prepared to basically bend over and take it versus the agencies who actually understand the true business value they represent. And the ones who challenge them and say, look, this is just not doable or realistic, they then use that to qualify, yep, they're the guys we want to work with because they get it. Whereas the agencies who just say yes before they've even checked the budget are actually the ones that they routinely will dismiss. Now, I'm not saying that's true across the board, and I'm sure that, and I'm always keen to clarify that if I'm ever caught criticising agency folk, which I often am, I'm also, that applies to client side too. There's flaws on both sides, and stupidity gets everywhere. But I thought it was a remarkable thing, and if it is true, I kind of take my hat off to those clients because it's a smart move.
I think it's absolutely true. I once pitched a piece of business, and once we won it, we were told that one of the other agencies had come in with a number that was less than half of what we were at. And the client told us that they really didn't understand the assignment.
Yeah, okay, yeah, there we go. Brilliant. Is there any other good advice that you've received in your time to date, David, that you can share with our listeners?
The best advice I've ever received in my life is don't believe your own bullshit.
Yes.
In line with that was how much bile do you want to swallow? That's when you decide if you're going to pick up and go. And I do have one third piece of advice that I learned from my mentor, a guy named Jay Schulberg, who was a grand title of global creative director or whatever. And he said it in a very fatherly way. He said, David, sometimes you have to be the creative director.
Wonderful.
Which meant don't worry about being liked. You got to do the job.
The reason I chose that creative director quote in your intro, and I actually changed it last minute because it really sings to me, is just because I say this. I remember someone saying to me years and years ago when I first started, in fact, it was my first agency role, and they described the role of a creative director versus that of a copywriter or art director as being like the difference between playing golf, where you can line up your shot, choose your club and take your time and practice a swing, to playing baseball where people are just hurling balls at you and you just have to bat them as best you can. And I think there's probably some sense in that, but I just loved your point about the fact that just because it's not the way you would do something, it doesn't make it wrong. Is that something that you had to learn the hard way? Because for me, it has been hard to learn that. Or do you just trump me massively on empathy and you knew that from the off?
No. I learned that from watching people above me do it wrong. I worked for my first creative director was a very talented art director, very talented guy, but he was terrible as a leader. As he would give the teams an assignment, and we'd all come in and present our work to him, and he'd go, that's good. And then he'd turn around and pull something out and go, well, here's what I came up with.
Right.
After you've done that 2 or 3 times, the teams quit trying. And then the other piece is when you find somebody, a young person who is enormously talented, and they bring you work that you just say, wow, I never would have come up with that. That's brilliant. That's when you learn to take a step back and go, I need to give this horse some rope. Some rein. Let's see where it goes. So you have to put your own ego aside.
Yeah. That's great advice. And is that true of many roles within a business, do you think, or is that mostly a kind of creative director type role?
I'm going to say it's probably more true in the creative director role, because a lot of the other jobs or the roles in an agency are more clearly defined with a clear right and wrong. The creative director is completely opinion. So what you have to do is, if you're in the talent that's working for you, it's their opinion. So that's why you've hired them. I don't hire an assembly line to produce my stuff. This is a trite saying, but as a creative director, your role should be to find great people, give them the tools that they need to succeed and get out of their way. Fight their battles so that they can focus on doing the work.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Whilst we're kind of digging into and picking on your experience, another one of the listener questions that we had was, what's the weirdest thing you ever saw in an ad agency?
Oh, I have no idea how to categorize what's the weirdest thing. I had the one where we were doing a new business pitch, and the president of the company came into the meeting and said, gee, he had something else coming up and he wouldn't be able to make it, but his wife would sit in for him. She looked like she smelled something bad the whole time. We didn't win that pitch. I don't know. I've seen some strange things, and none of them are coming too much to mind at the moment.
If any pop up, just shout out. There's a quick before I do try and tackle, and I lied earlier, I'm going to have to get more than 2 into our listener questions. But before we dig into that, there's a wild card topic of sorts, that I'm entirely clueless as to why we're bringing this up. But I understand you have a love of cover songs and a connection between cover songs and advertising. So what the hell is that all about?
Oh, yes, I love this. So I do love cover songs.
Okay.
You know, where there's a song that's well known, and then
Yeah.
you hear somebody else do a completely different take on it, and it's like it opens up your eyes to something completely new. And that's what we do in advertising. We don't really create something completely new, because if we do, it's an idea that people can't get their heads around and they don't get it. What we do is we find something that they know, find a truth, something they're familiar with, and then we put a different twist on it to use it for our selling message. So if you take a truth and then twist it, now you're doing what we do with a cover song. You take a song that we know, like one of my absolute favorites, the song "Top of the World," Carpenter song, covered by this Japanese power pop trio called Shonen Knife, all-girl power pop trio. You cannot listen to that song without being happy. It is just absolute stunner. But yeah, and you can just go on and on when you start going down it. But it's because you take something familiar and you build on it and you twist it.
Now I get it. I have an unhealthy obsession with a guy called Richard Cheese, who is
yes, lounge singer.
For that exact reason. In fact, my two young daughters love his cover of Gangnam Style.
Well, if you also want to blow people's minds, "Ring of Fire," the Johnny Cash song,
yes,
is covered by Billy Bob Thornton and Earl Scruggs. With
really?
Sort of a hip hop beat and a heavy banjo. It is the most bizarre mashup, but it's wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, I'm definitely going to check that out.
Or the Beatles' "Girl," covered by Tiny Tim and Brave New Combo. One time I had an agency and we had on hold music, and I programmed the music, and it included most of these very strange cover songs. And I would get my account people would say, "I just got off the phone with a client and they said, 'What on earth is that music that's playing?'" And I said, "Good. Now you had a discussion with them rather than boring them. You give them something to talk about."
Oh, that's brilliant. And I wonder also whether this falls under cover songs, because it's kind of representing something familiar in a more interesting way. But that lovely line, "Finally, Walmart has Gleason." See, we have done our research.
Yeah. Yes, you have. No, that was, and I have to give credit to my planner who came up with that one. But I was like, that's brilliant.
Yeah, as soon as you said it, I just thought, wow, it's beautiful. And in fact, you know, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but certainly for why I love this industry, it's for simple yet beautiful moments like that, where you just a reordering of words can just make my soul smile, assuming I have a soul.
Yes, well, you know, hopefully somewhere underneath it, advertising hasn't totally destroyed it.
Time, weather, and...
We interrupt this podcast as we thought your ears had suffered enough of the monotone ramblings of the host. Now this is a voice. Most pods drop an ad into these interruptions, not gasp. We won't awkwardly nudge you to contact the pod's host at giles@gasp.agency to talk client retention and brand positioning, like other companies did just the other day. Let's get you back to the show.
The story starts, she said with glee, with a wizard chimpanzee.
Oh, the beautifully voiced Gem reading Gasp book. Adele writes an ad there, but not what we're after. Hang on.
Right.
There we go.
I'm going to go to listener questions, David, and I'm just going to hurl loads at you.
All right.
Asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger. Let's start. Well, let's just have a moment here to enjoy one of Derek Walker's. What is it like to work with the brilliant and handsome Derek Walker?
I don't know. Oh, wait.
Oh, that Derek Walker.
I'll tell you when I meet that one. No. Derek is a good guy. Derek's a good guy. Cynical as heck, and he has reason to be, but he's a lot of fun.
Yeah, he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. Right, so we have a question here from, he goes on Twitter, it's at GQBound, aka the writer Brian J. Wilder. And Brian says, what's a trait or skill set that you feel is missing in creatives today, specifically copywriters?
Curiosity. And I think a lack of willingness to look back and see what has come before us. In almost every other field, we build on precedent, whether it's legal work, whether it's filmmaking, whether it's art. But advertising, in particular copywriters, we seem to think that, oh no, we're the only ones who are inventing this. There's nothing good that could have ever possibly come before us.
Yeah. Oh, that's really well said, actually. We build on precedent in other industries. I've never heard it put that way, but yeah, absolutely right. I recorded a show, our 100th show with Mr. Mark Ritson, and I made the same or a similar point to him and questioned why in universities studying creativity and advertising and all of our dark arts, why it isn't a simple case of just showcasing the late, great Jeremy Bullmore's words. I think he kind of succinctly pointed out that many of the lecturers probably hadn't heard of him either. But you're right, as an industry, we don't build on precedent. What a shame. Carolyn Barclay asks, how do you attract, retain and inspire great creative talent when your clients aren't big, sexy brands? It's a good question.
It is a great question. It's not easy. One of the things that I did, and I did this at a couple of agencies, was created a program called After Hours, where we encouraged the creative teams to seek their own clients, do their own work. We would use the agency resources, meaning at the time, the computer technology, the printers or whatever, to create your own work. So you're not having to deal with it through a client or an account person, because our clients were banks and insurance companies, very traditional, conservative people who spent months or years developing a campaign. But you give a creative team free rein and say, you go do it without anybody standing in the way. See what you can do. And at the end of the year, we would pay the entry fees or the award shows for that. But what it did is it allowed them the chance to see how far they could go. And that work didn't just give us recognition, but we ended up winning clients, paying clients because of it. And I remember having account people coming to me and saying, how come we're not doing this kind of work for my clients? Like, well, let's have a talk about that. Because you're standing in the way. But giving creative people that ability to test themselves and push themselves without being told, oh no, you can't do that, or the client won't buy that. That I think really did a lot to retain them, and also became a place where people wanted to go because they knew that they could do great work.
That's a lovely idea. I'm a big fan of that. In relation to one of our first media topics about ad agencies advertising themselves, we actually had a question from a friend of the show, Jake Saunders, and I wonder if it's applicable for what you've just shared about after hours and perhaps why agencies might struggle to accommodate something like that these days. But Jake asked, is it a budgeting thing that prevents ad agencies from advertising and marketing themselves? And I wonder, I know you did say margins was a key factor, but I wonder if it's the very same reason why it might be prohibitive for agencies to offer something like after hours to their teams.
I think it entirely is, because there's so much emphasis on the billable hour, and you've got to produce, that there's no time for what is seen as, well, frivolous or non-billable work. And that gets back to one of the other topics that is really tough, is compensation. Because if you're not being paid properly for the work, then you're not going to do the work. And I'm going off on another rant and tangent here, which is not really directed to Jake's question. But when I would be in a new business pitch and I would sit down and talk with the prospect and say, why are you looking for a new agency? And inevitably, the most common answer was, well, my agency never brings me any new ideas. They only give me what I ask them for. And usually that's because, well, how are you paying them? If you're only paying them to deliver X, it becomes a transactional piece of business, and they're not going to go out of their way. If the agency tries to budget enough in to their fee to compensate for the time that they spent chasing wild geese, you're going to beat them down on the price.
Yeah.
So that's right. You get away from the billable hour, which will then, coming back to Jake's question, I think if you do that, then you can have the freedom to pursue different avenues and bigger ideas and allow your team to promote themselves.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, again, I think you've articulated that really well, and all of those kind of pain points are linked, whether that was directly an answer to Jake's question or not. I've got a couple here. I'm gonna sandwich into one. So again, Derek and Carolyn really went at it. So Derek has asked, what would you do differently as far as your career? And on a similar line, Carolyn asks, no one learns much from the wins. So what mistakes have you made in advertising that taught you the most, and how can we avoid them?
What I would do different is I would take more risks and I would trust myself more, trust my gut more. There have been times in my career when I knew something wasn't right, but I just didn't want to address it.
Yeah.
I let things get out of control. And it's a heck of a lot more work to try to fix it after the fact than to prevent it.
Yes.
Mistakes that I've learned? Probably the same thing. Waiting too long to address something that I knew was a problem, whether it's a personnel issue or an agency issue or a client issue. You end up stepping back and trusting other people. And there were times when I trusted other people too much. Oh, and I did remember probably the strangest thing that I ever had seen in an agency.
Oh, brilliant.
It was just the most bizarre experience. We were pitching a very major piece of business for our office. I was part of an agency network, and we were pitching a cellular phone business, and we spent 2.5 months on the pitch. We traveled around, did site visits, put tons of work into it. We were pitching against two very, very, very good agencies, Butler Shine Stern and Vitro Robertson, and somehow we won. We won the business. And we were thrilled, just ecstatic. They awarded it to us on the spot, took us to lunch, awarded us the business. We called the office and talked how wonderful it was. And then on the flight back that night, the account person got a phone call that we had to resign the business because our New York offices, one of their largest clients, acquired a competitor of this business that we just won.
Oh.
We had that business less than 24 hours.
Wow.
Ow.
Wow.
I don't know if that was bizarre to me to go through all of that, go that high, and then that was a roller coaster.
So quickly too. Oh my word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that hurt. That hurt bad.
Yeah, I'd still be getting over that. Right, so the final part of the interview then, David, is our 4 pertinent posers, starting with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Younger self, be brave. Be braver. And yeah, you can do it.
Yeah. It's not come up, necessarily a significant amount of times, but there is a kind of consistent theme of that. It's funny, isn't it? I wonder, I've often thought that you need experience, and therefore age, I suppose, is kind of a byproduct, isn't it, of experience to kind of think about that and the kind of benefit that you get from age and experience. Just, I don't know how attainable that is at that age. I don't know. I certainly think, and this kind of relates back to, and is a nod to Carolyn's previous question about learning from mistakes, that we don't really encourage people to talk about failure in a way that I think we should, that I think would be healthy for people to learn from.
I think you're right. Wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from mistakes.
Yes.
Yeah. I like to say, how do you know where the line is until you cross it?
Yeah, nice. Number 2 is, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
A pursuit of vanity metrics. I work with a lot of people who all the digital work is about, well, this is what gets the most views. This is what gets the most views. Well, I don't care if cute kids dressed up as adults in your video get a lot of views because moms want to share it. It doesn't have anything to do with our message that we're trying to sell. But it got views. And I do fight that battle a lot.
Yeah. Where do you sit on awards as a vanity metric of sorts? There's a lot to unpack there. It's a bit unfair for me to sneak that in.
That's all right. I am a believer in the value of awards. I've been a chair of our local award show I think it's valuable as a recruitment piece for the agency. I'm not certain that a lot of clients look at it and really care about it, but to keep your people motivated, to keep your people excited, yeah, you need to go ahead and reward them, and that's a way to do it. At the agency network I worked for, they put a moratorium on awards because of the fees. I didn't want to spend the money. Well, I went ahead and entered something that I'd done and paid for myself and won at the local level, and it went on. Suddenly they decided to step up and support that once they'd seen it was going to win and get attention for the agency. But I think they're valuable. I think they have a place, but I do think they've gotten out of control. Like, I have every copy of the One Show Awards annual, and I love to refer to them and see, not to go and copy, but to see how did somebody else solve this problem.
Yeah,
because there are really no new problems.
Yes, yeah, true. Are there any books that you can recommend to our listeners apart from the One Show annuals?
Oh, the One Show annuals is on my list. Otherwise, I'd say one of my absolute favorite books about the advertising is Where the Suckers Moon by Randall Rothenberg. Have you read that one?
No, never. And it's never come up before. Never come up before.
I currently have 3 copies of it because I loan copies and I never get them back. Yeah. It is subtitled The Life and Death of an Advertising Campaign. So Randall Rothenberg was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and the people at Subaru Motors let him in behind the scenes as they went through the agency pitch. So he was in all the pitches and all the back negotiations. And then when Wyden and Kennedy won the business, they let him sit in. And the first year of that campaign went horribly wrong for everybody. And it's a wonderful tale about what can go wrong in this business. I'm a big fan of Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything, because the lessons that you get from that are amazing and you can apply to about anything we do. And in advertising, a book that I refer to weekly is Dan Nelken's Self-Help Guide for Copywriters. It is hands down the single most practical book that you can have in the business.
Yeah, it's very popular, isn't it, Dan?
It is. And I put a plug in for myself. I host a quarterly virtual advertising book club, and Dan has been on our club. We've had Thomas Kemeny with Junior. We've had Luke Sullivan and Tay Whipple. So yeah, I'm a big fan of ad books.
Yes, yeah, great. Well, I mean, we'll link to your book club as well, actually, and encourage people to get involved in that for sure. Great. Yeah, Where the Suckers Moon. I feel slightly foolish for never even. It's one of those books I've never heard of, genuinely never heard of. But I'm going to check that out. It's
truly wonderful. I love it. It makes you laugh and makes you realize how just ridiculous this business is.
Good.
One of the takeaways in that was when one of the agency pitches, the agency principal pounds his fist on the table and says, "I won't rest until we have an automotive account at this agency." And the people on the other side of the table are going, "Why do we care? What's about us?"
Yeah. And then number 4, David, we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest who has to give their reason why.
Well, I would dedicate this episode to my partner, Carolyn Barclay, who really gave me a new passion and excitement and interest in the ad industry after I think I'd gotten into kind of a sad, dark place about it and had thought about giving up. And she came along with energy and enthusiasm and has really reinvigorated me. And I'm only just begun. I'm in chapter 2. Yes. It's really exciting. So thank you.
That's awesome. This is. I'm so proud to be able to dedicate this episode to Carolyn. What a lovely dedication. Fantastic. Well, I'm pleased to hear that too. We all need a bit of energy and picking up from time to time. So yeah, that's wonderful. As a final call to action then, the episode will list everything, including Where the Suckers Moon. We'll have Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything. Dan's wonderful self-help guide for copywriters. And as I said, a link to David's advertising book club, which runs quarterly. How else can our listeners get more David Moore?
Well, if anybody's still on Twitter, you can find me at Twitter at Elroy the Cat, which was the name of my cat when I opened up my Twitter account. Find me on LinkedIn. And if anybody has any interest, I do have a presentation on why advertising agencies should advertise themselves and how they need to go about it. So reach out to me. You can drop me an email at davidmooreecd@gmail.com.
Perfect.
Or take a look at kingswoodandpalmerston.com. That's the other great place to find us.
Yes, we will include a link to both your email and KMP, your agency. So wonderful. Listen, David, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm honored to be on that list when you include names like Mark Ritson and all of the folks that I've listened to. It's like, which one of these doesn't fit?
Don't be daft.
Which is like an agency pitch I did once. We're doing a pitch and happened to look at the sign-in sheet for the other agencies. And it was the Richards Group and Carmichael Lynch and us. And it's like, okay, one of these doesn't fit. And it's us.
Wonderful. Thank you finally to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the podcast. Keep your questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online or email calltoaction@gasp.agency.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try. And I try, and I try, and I try.